What's up, Tolkien Poppers? Just Nick here with another audio introduction to some fun Tolkien-related stuff. So what I have for you today is a talk from a friend of Tolkien Pop, friend of Tolkien Heads, Homebrewed Christianity, all that extended universe. We have Craig Boyd, PhD, who has joined us for an online conference that Tripp and I did called Interchanging Melodies, and he gave a talk on Gandalf as a Jesuit priest, and this audio that you'll be hearing will be on Craig's talk at Theology Beer Camp 2023, where he talked about hope and despair in the Lord of the Rings. So the theme at Theology Beer Camp last year was deconstruction and just crisis of faith and how do we handle that as individuals and with friends. And Craig took the Lord of the Rings and the themes of hope and despair and brought that to the overall theme at Theology Beer Camp. And so this is a little taste of what you'll be getting if you come to Theology Beer Camp 2024, which will be October 17th through 19th in Denver, Colorado. So if you go to Google, you can Google Theology Beer Camp 2024. It will bring you to an Eventbrite page where you can get your ticket, and you can use a code of mine to get $50 off your ticket. So at checkout, use the code TolkienRing, TolkienRing for $50 off your ticket. So enjoy Craig's talk, and hopefully it'll be a lure into you coming out and hanging out with us in October. Okay, enjoy, everybody. Talk to you soon.
All right, y'all. We are going to get started here just because we're almost at 3:55 here. But my name is Nick, and I am one of the co-hosts on Systematic Ecology. I did the Tolkien Heads class with Tripp for Homebrewed Christianity right before the release of Rings of Power. And then I also write a Substack called Tolkien Pop, which explores the intersection of pop culture and Tolkien in general, because Tolkien touches all things, including Star Wars, which if you were here from before we even were talking about, the trilogy and the ongoing expanse of Star Wars, which is very Tolkien-esque. But our guest today, who's going to be talking with us, is Craig Boyd, who I'm going to let him kind of fill in the details here, but he is a professor at St. Louis University, correct? Craig is awesome. We got to meet through some Tolkien scholarship circles, and Craig got to speak at a online Tolkien conference that me and Tripp organized called Interchanging Melodies, which kind of explores religious pluralism and ecumenical approaches to Tolkien. And so Craig is going to talk a bit, and then TJ and I will come back and ask him questions. And of course, you all will be welcome to ask questions and interact with Craig. So Craig, let's give Craig a round of applause for being here, because Craig is very cool. And then Craig will take it from here. So thanks, Craig. Tell us a little about yourself and take it.
Thanks, Nick. My background is actually in medieval philosophy, and I've also done a good deal of work in virtue ethics, and I like to say I'm better at the vices than the virtues, but that's kind of an existential situation for me, okay? So just bear with me there. But I got into reading Tolkien when I was very, very young. I started Lord of the Rings when I was 6, after my brother read to me The Hobbit when I was 5. And I asked him, I said, are there any other books like this? And he said, oh, yes, there are. And so I remember going with my mother to the library, going to the children's section, looking for these books. And of course, they weren't there. And I was very disappointed. But the librarian said, well, hold on, wait a minute. These books are upstairs in the adult section. And I kind of rolled my eyes. I remember that. And we trudged up the steps to the adult section. And sure enough, they were there. So we checked it out, and there weren't as many pictures as I had hoped there would be, because I was 6. It took us 2 years to read through them, and I would ask her often, how do you say this word? And of course, I didn't know that they weren't English words. I didn't know that many of them were made up, and neither did she. So I've had a lifelong love of Tolkien. And So recently, just a couple years ago, at my advanced years, I've started a master's degree in literature, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through. So I want to really understand the literary elements here. So I'm not just simply this person who says, well, I have a PhD in this one area, therefore I can speak authoritatively about everything else. I don't want to be that person. So that's kind of my background there. I'm a professor of philosophy and humanities at St. Louis University. And it's great because they let me write on pretty much whatever I want to write on. So the last few years I've been working on Tolkien, and I do some things in unusual ways. I've got an essay coming out with my daughter on Tolkien and Foucault, titled Foucault's Towers and Tolkien's Panopticon. So for those of you who know Foucault, that's, you might find that entertaining. But just a little bit of preface here. How many of you have read the letters, Tolkien's letters? Okay. In his letter 56 to his son Christopher, he writes about going out with his friend C.S. Lewis. And this is really appropriate for a Theology beer camp for a reason you will see very quickly. He says, I went out with Lewis this last Tuesday, and he put away 3 pints before lunch. Now, you have to understand that imperial pints are 20% larger than American pints. So by noon, C.S. Lewis had consumed half a gallon of beer. Okay? Now, for me, reading that, being raised pietist, where we knew that alcohol was evil, that was a liberating experience for me. Okay? So that's something I thought was really appropriate for the context here. And then I should preface this also with the joke that many of you know about the priest who visits the family with a young son, and the priest asks the parents, he says, do you read to your son from the good book? And they say, oh, yes, Father, we do, every night. And the priest asks, well, what's his favorite part? And the parents say enthusiastically, the part where the ring is destroyed at Mount Doom. And so with that in mind, I will turn to the good book. Book 6, Chapter 2, page 922. One of my favorite passages. And this is In the Land of Shadow. Far above the Ifil Duath in the west, the night sky was still dim and pale. There, peeping among the cloud rack, above a dark tor, high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. At the conclusion of this, because I'm a lector at a Catholic church, I want to say the word of the Lord. Thank you. But that is just such powerful language. And for me, that captures what I think is really kind of the key, at least from my understanding, of Tolkien's work, and that is this tension, this battle, if you will, or a dialectic between hope and despair. And so if you've read many of the commentaries or the secondary literature, you might read something by Verlyn Flager, who has this book, Splintered Light, and so she really gets into the light and darkness themes. But of course, light and darkness parallel hope and despair. They really do. And I think that is what's going on if you go all the way back to the Silmarillion. You read the history of Middle-earth, you read all of these, you read the entirety of his work, including the nonfiction, which I think is very illuminative in terms of trying to understand his work. So my basic approach here today is trying to see hope and despair as the key to kind of seeing how Tolkien is grappling with these existential questions, okay? Now, that quote is from Sam, and Sam, of course, is, Tolkien says, the chief hero. He's not the only hero, but he's the chief hero, and I love that. But Sam is also humble, and this notion of humility is tied in also with hope, because the person who has hope is also humble in the sense that they know they're going to need help to achieve their task. But of course, this word humility and human and humor all are linguistic cognates. And they all come from this Latin word for earth, humus. And what is Sam's job? And where does a gardener work? He is very close to the earth. He is a very earthy character, if you will, right? And not just in the physical sense, but in the metaphoric sense. He's a very earthy character. Sam has humility, but he also has hope. But there are others who have hope. Gandalf wears the ring Narya, and Narya is the ring that encourages hope. Okay? And so you have this element of hope that's going through it, but then you have Aragorn, whose name in Sindarin is Estel, and that name means hope. The word hope is mentioned 187 times just in The Return of the King. Okay? So that's just one of, actually it's two of the books, because because you are at the geek stage, there are 6 books, not 3, right? All right, can I get an amen there? Yeah, thank you. So what does that mean? It means that I think this is very important to Tolkien. So what do we mean by hope? So I want to start with hope, then I want to look at despair, and then I want to return to hope once again. So because I'm a medievalist myself and I write on virtue ethics, I like to go to Thomas Aquinas, and he gives us a definition of hope that is the patient expectation of a difficult but possible future good. Let me repeat that. It is the patient expectation of a difficult but possible future good. Okay? And that is what these characters have. It has to be patient. Okay? You don't get it immediately. It's an expectation because you're waiting for it, and it's difficult. The trip to Mordor is not a walk in the park, right? It's a difficult good, but it is a good. And because it is a good, there is something about hope that really expresses who we are in this life right now. The philosopher Joseph Pieper, in his book, Faith, Hope, Love, talks about hope in terms of what he calls the status viatoris. Okay, I'm sorry I'm using Latin words here, and I hope you'll be patient with me. But status viatoris, a viator, is a person on a journey. And what are the characters doing most of the time in The Lord of the Rings? They're walking on a journey, right? Yes, there's an unexpected journey, and one does not just walk into Mordor. Okay, right? Now, I'm going to mix in some of the movie and some of the book, of course, here, but bear with me a bit. It's a journey. And so a person on a journey is hoping to get to that destination. And once you get to that destination, once you get there, I'm going to return to this a little bit later, you have joy at the end of the journey. Because joy is being in the presence of the good or in the presence of the beloved. That's why your dog is so excited to see you when you come home. That dog is experiencing joy. It's doggy joy, not human joy, okay? But it's still joy. And so what you have then is this notion that this journey, it finds us in the middle of things. In media res is the Latin term. We are all in the middle of things. Now, some of us might be a little bit closer to the end of the middle. Some of us might be closer to the beginning of the middle of our journeys. But the journey is where we are, and it's contrasted with something called the status comprehensoris. The status comprehensoris, the person who is a comprehensor, is someone who has attained it all, who understands it all, who believes that they know it all, and so there is no movement. So the person who is a viator is on the move. The person who is the comprehensor is static. And this tells us something about two vices that are opposed to hope. One is pride, and they can actually exist at the same time. So the person who is proud assumes that they've already arrived, and so there's no reason to be on the journey. They already know, okay? They know everything. But the other vice that is opposed is despair. So if we return to that definition of hope as the patient expectation of a difficult but possible future good, the person who has despair, and the Latin word here is literally despair, that person is at the point where that good is no longer possible. Okay? So the person who is in despair is also stuck. The person who's in despair cannot move. Okay? Now, this takes us into kind of managing hope here a little bit, because hope is Aquinas says, it's an emotion, but it's also a virtue. And as a virtue, what we have to understand about hope is that hope is this virtue where we are hoping in the good, and the good helps us because the good is a person. The good is God who helps us hope in the journey, and we are hoping for God and in God. So there's this permeation of hope in the life of the person who is the viator. Because once you stop, it's because you think you've already arrived, or because you think there is no reason to continue on, okay? If you think about the person who suffers from despair the most in The Lord of the Rings, it's Denethor. What's interesting about the contrast between Denethor and one of the other antagonists, Gollum has hope until the very end, doesn't he? I mean, it's not a virtuous hope, okay? Because he desires something evil, not something that's good, right? But he thinks it's good, but he's still hoping all to that very end, and finally he has it, and got to tell you here, spoiler alert, he dies. Okay, I know that's a shock to you, and I apologize to everyone who's listening. Yes, it's true. But Denethor is really interesting because he has pride, and of course, what facilitates his pride is that he has a palantir. And where does he look at the palantir? Where is he when he does this? He's up in the tower. Are there other people with him helping him understand what's going on with the palantir? No, he's by himself. And if you read Unfinished Tales, you'll see that the palantir was designed to make the knowledge public to everyone, not private. And here's another interesting play on words. This word private that we have comes from this word provatio, which means a lacking. So it was meant to be shared fully, the knowledge of the palantir, with other people rather than hidden and, making the rest of the community lack in their knowledge. And so, of course, we have another person who has a palantir who also inhabits a tower by himself, the wicked wizard Saruman. So this is really interesting that because Denethor has this, and he's also kind of infatuated with his own wisdom and his own intelligence and his own knowledge, he trusts in himself, and he trusts that he understands what's going on in the palantir. And of course, he's deceived. And whenever whenever Gandalf tells him something, he objects to it, he calls Gandalf a fool. It's very interesting, the use of the term fool, by the way, throughout. Who is called a fool and who is using the term fool? Of course, Gandalf calls Pippin a fool of a took. And he is, but thank goodness Pippin, develops and matures, and so he's no longer a fool by the end. But there's this notion that anyone who does not agree with my assessment is a fool because they are not as smart as I am, because I alone have knowledge of this. And so when he despairs alone. And here's something very important to remember, is that when people despair, they despair alone. When they have hope, they hope in a community and with a community. So even Frodo and Sam, just the two of them, they have a community that helps them along. And there is a line where Pippin asks Gandalf, is there any hope? I mean hope for Frodo? And Gandalf says to him, well, only a fool's hope, or so I've been told. So I find that this whole notion of despair particularly powerful. And one of the things about what Tolkien does in The Children of Húrin and in Unfinished Tales, he uses a technical term. It's called wanhope. And wanhope is an Old English term. And if you know much about Tolkien himself, he worked on the very first edition of the Oxford English Dictionary. How many of you were aware of that? And do you know what letter he worked on? W, yes. 10 points for Gryffindor. So what you find there is he is editing all of these words on W, and of course he's working with wanhope, wander, all of these things. And so this word wan has the idea of a lacking, an emptiness, if you will. And there's a cognate with the word vanity. So vanity probably should be called wanity in the sense of it is a false or an empty sense of pride in oneself. And so wanhope is one of these words. There's also another word that is used in his edited edition of the medieval text Ancrene Wisa, and that's called unhope. But he uses wanhope here, and wanhope is a particular kind of despair. It's a theological definition of despair, and it is the despair that not even the grace of God is powerful enough to save me. And there are some theologians, I'm not a theologian, by the way, I'm a philosopher, so I'm just riffing here, okay? So indulge me. A number of theologians say that wanhope is the unforgivable sin. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was 7 years old and I read about the unforgivable sin, I was wondering, have I done that? Have I committed that? If it's unforgivable, then I can't get forgiveness, can I? And so I had lots of angst about that in the rapture. We're not going to go there tonight or this afternoon, okay? But this notion of wanhope, you can see it he uses it to describe Denethor. Denethor has wanhope. He no longer has hope in the grace of, you might even say, the good. Now, of course, if you're someone who has studied medieval philosophy like I have, well, the good is God. God's very being, so the good is, and of course in the Lord of the Rings, there isn't a whole lot, explicit, there's not much there in terms of the divine beings, but, looking at the entire corpus, you've got the Silmarillion, and of course, Eru Ilúvatar is the good, right? So what you have then is this notion of a despair that not even the divine can save me. Probably in the English tradition, the best example of this is Dr. Faustus, where he's being encouraged to, just throw yourself on the grace of God. He says, I can't, I'm so bad, I can't do that. So this kind of despair is a despair that is done in isolation, and it is a despair that one cannot find one's way out because one is so bad, one is so upset, one is so distraught that there is no glimpse of light anywhere. So there is no hope. So what do we do in the face of despair? In Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, the very end, you probably all know this passage where he's talking about what is the good of fairy stories, and he lists a number of reasons. There's escape, there's reconciliation, there's all these kinds of things, but he introduces this term, eucatastrophe. And he defines it as the joy of the happy ending, or more correctly, the sudden joyous turn. It is a small, sudden, miraculous grace, or it is a sudden miraculous grace, never to be counted on or to recur. It does not deny the existence of dicatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies universal final defeat, and insofar is evangelium, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy beyond the walls of the world and poignant as grief. This is what happens in The Lord of the Rings, where if we return to Sam here as I wind up, Sam's vision of the star. He knows that the darkness is a passing thing. And so if we fast forward to the field of Cormoran, Sam wakes up and he finds it hard to believe, and he says to Gandalf, "Is everything sad going to come untrue?" And what happens is that Gandalf laughs, and he laughs with him, and Sam laughs, and they laugh until they cry. And that, I think, is a joyous, poignant ending to, there are 7 or 8 different endings, but this one I think is the most poignant for me. So thank you for your attention.